Today I'll be talking about microinteractions and animations using frame emotion. I'm sure most of you would have used frame emotion in their side projects or at work, or in case you haven't, don't worry, I'll try my best to explain the best practices, how you can build a microinteraction, and you can leverage frame emotion, basically, the talk is all about, and build a microinteraction. Just before the talk, hi everyone, I'm Apoorv. I work at Earnest. As a front-end engineer, I love to travel to mountains and cop sneakers. I'm pretty active on Twitter. In case you want to connect there, here's my Twitter handle. Now, what are microinteractions, right? So you can consider microinteractions as a small or a crucial piece of animation that keeps the user engaged when something is happening in the background. The most basic example of that could be, which you encounter every day, is let's say you are scrolling Instagram and you have to reload the new post. So what you do is you scroll to the top, pull down, and then there's a loader which keeps loading, and you see that new posts are coming in, right? So that is keeping you engaged while something is happening in the background, while the data is being fetched, right? You see this on your browser as well. Let's say if you have to refresh a page. So you follow the same thing. You pull down to refresh. And that keeps you engaged, right, unless the page is loaded. The next example could be dating apps, right? So you swipe left or right to match with a person. So when you're swiping, that keeps you engaged, like whether it's a match or not. If you swipe left, that keeps you engaged. So that's again an example of microinteraction. It also adds a unique brand value apparently, because if I ask you what is that app where you hover on the like section and it opens all the emojis where you can react, you would know that's Facebook, right? So it adds a lot of branding to the product you are using. So that's why microinteractions are like pretty important. If you're building a microinteraction, there are like basically 4 steps involved, or like there are 4 points which you have to consider. One is trigger. You can consider this as like what triggers the microinteraction, how it actually begins. There can be 2 ways you can start a microinteraction. One could be manual trigger, and second is automatic. Manual triggers is like, again, like, you are swiping to someone or dating app. So that's like you are manually triggering. You are pulling down to refresh. So that's a manual trigger. You can consider automatic as, let's say, you receive a new notification on your phone. So that fades in your notification bar. So that just happened automatically, right? The second is rules. Rules basically means how the microinteraction should behave in general. Like, what all elements should animate? What should the timeline look like? When should the animation stop? So that defines the whole path of a microinteraction. Feedback. Feedback is like a sense of a verification or a feedback a user gets once they have performed the interaction, right? Let's say it could be you want to show a success message if the user has performed something. So you show a toast. If you want to show a pending state, you do something else. If you want to show that something has failed after performing an action. So that's like a feedback to the user once a user triggers an animation and it has ended, or it's still in the processing phase. That's like a feedback for the user. Next is loops and mode, right? So this basically means the timeline of a microinteraction. So if someone triggers it, could be manually or automatically, how long should it apparently run? Like, should it run it for indefinite time? Should it stop? Should it change its time if a user changes something in between or interacts with it again, right? So when you're building a microinteraction, you need to consider these 4 points. I know it's like a lot of theory, but I'll apparently showcase how these 4 points fit into the picture, like when I'll be coding like a few prototypes. Now, frame of motion, right? Apparently, there are like a lot of libraries which can help you in achieving this thing, the whole animation thing, but I really prefer frame of motion. There are a couple of reasons for that. One being the performance, right? So let's say if you have to run animations on web. So there are 2 ways, apparently. You run animations, like, so it's browser responsibility, apparently. So either you use Web Animations API, which is WA API, and the next one is you use GPUs and run animation via CSS. So what frame of motion does its motion engine is like a hybrid engine. It intelligently figures out that, okay, if JavaScript thread is busy, they can run the animations on GPU so that it's not blocked for you or for the user. So that's like a very good point of frame of motion. And if a user is interacting with something, right, there are like gestures involved. Majority of the micro interactions begin with gestures. Let's say you hover on something, you tapped on something, you drag, pan. So all these are like the gestures, right? So frame of motion has like pretty good API abstracted for each of the gestures out there. So it kind of becomes easy to animate on each of the gestures. And the best part is like a lot of hooks are abstracted. I won't go into detail of like all the hooks, but you can easily figure out the course of a animation easily. If you want to know what's the velocity of an object if it's moving from point A to B, you can easily figure out. If you want to figure out when the animation just started or when it ends, if you want to call an event listener to it. So like there's like the API is pretty easy for beginners, and it's like pretty good if you want to build from a simple to a complex animation with a lot of customization apparently. So I know that's like a lot of theory. Why don't we check out some of the examples I've like prepared. So these are like a very quick prototypes. They are still not ready for production, but it's just for the demo purposes. This is like a bottom navigation, right? And this is pretty common in mobile devices. You would see it everywhere. Like Swiggy has something similar, Zomato has something similar, right? So if you have to build something like this on web, so if you click on this, you would expect this state would be active and this would work. Like this is fine. It is good, it works fine, but what if you want to make it a bit more engaging, a bit more smooth in terms of transition when you transition from one tab to another tab? So what you do is you import this motion component from Framer, and the rest of the logic is just the rendering. There's nothing happening here. The main magic happens here in this piece of code. So what I do is this is a Tailwind classes. So what I do is I mention the transition, and what I'm saying, I want the transition to be of type spring. So this is by default something Framer Motion provides, and bounce is like the bounciness of the spring, like it happens, and what duration. This still won't work. Yeah, if I load it, if I do this still won't work, even though we have specified. Now the magic here is the layout ID. When any motion component, which you have exported from the Framer Motion, has a layout ID mentioned to it, as in this case, and it changes its position in the tree, right, it would automatically be animated from its previous position to the new one, right? So I don't have to worry about anything. So this was my like initial position, and if I click on this, let's say this settings icon, we can assume it's a settings icon, and its position would be changed apparently in the tree, right? So it would automatically be animated from its previous position to the new one, right? You notice that it moves like smoothly over there, right? And if I remove this layout ID, this won't work because this would like be a normal, like if a tab is active. The whole magic is around the layout ID. I can give another example of this, how layout ID works apparently. So if you open a phone gallery, right, you would notice that if you click on any of the image, it starts expanding from its initial position and takes up the whole screen. So for example, if I click on this image, bottom one, it will start expanding from its original position and it will take up the whole screen. For example, this, right? Now, this is again one simple layout ID which is doing the magic. I've defined some IDs there. I'm using one API to fetch images based on the ID. But yeah, I'm rendering all the images here, right? And I'm giving each of the image a layout ID based on the parameter I'm mapping over. So this has a layout ID of image 1, right? Once I click on this image, I'm saying the selected image would have the same ID, and this would come into the picture, and this would apparently render on the screen. And this would have the same ID as image 1. So let's say if I select this first image, this would have the same ID as image 1. Now what happens is, this is like a new element which is there. Now, it will animate from its initial position, which is this one, and it will animate back to the new position. So it goes back to its new position. If I remove this layout ID, it won't work. It will be just like something just pops up on screen and nothing will happen. Oh, I need to reload. Right, it just comes up on the screen. There's no animation. Right, so the whole magic here is with the layout ID. Right, so this is like, you can use like just one simple layout ID and play a lot with the frame of motion apparently, right? I'll show you another prototype, which is a YouTube subscribe button. This is apparently not very similar to the YouTube subscribe button, but yeah, kind of similar. So if you click on YouTube subscribe, you see a lot of sparkles in and around. There's a bell icon that shakes, right? So I've tried to copy that somehow, but this is not like an exact replica, but that's a prototype. So what is happening here is if you click on this button, right, there's an animation that is happening in sequence. It's not just one element that is animating. There are like different stars and different particles that are animating. There's the button expands, the bell icon shakes if you see it, right? There's like multiple things happening in and around. So this is apparently called running animation in sequence, which is like pretty common if you want multiple elements to animate in just one go. So that's also possible with Framer. All you have to do is just import this hook, which is use animate. It provides you two things, which is scope and animate. We can ignore the scope for now, but yeah, let's focus on the animate function. So what I'm doing is I'm defining a sequence here. I'm saying animation reset is like roll back to initial state. I want the button to scale down to 0.8. I want the animation to begin, which is all the particles in and around. Then I want the button to scale to a bigger size. Then I want those stars and everything to fade out. And then I again want the button to scale back to its original position, right? And I'm apparently passing all these sequence into animate function, and that's how I can run animation in sequence. That works, right? So apparently, I won't be able to go through all these codes because like I have a couple of more prototypes to show, but I'll be sharing the link so you can go through these functions which I've already written, and you can expand it and check how it's like very basic out there. So if you can just check it. But yeah, this prototype was around how you can run animation in sequence. The next is, again, a micro interaction. Let's say this text reveals every second something is like popping up on the screen. It's fading. It's starting from opacity 0 to opacity 1, right? So, and it's happening in a sync. Like it's all the previous element and the next element. The animation is in a sync. So that's how am I doing this? Is so there's like a big sentence. I'm breaking each of these sentence right into a word, and each of these word is wrapped in a span. Right, so what I'm saying is, as soon as the component loads, the use effect will come into the picture, and I'm saying animate all the span elements and change its opacity. Initially, the opacity for each of the span element is 0, right? It's 0. And I want it to animate to opacity 1. And the duration for each animation should be 2. Now the whole logic or the whole magic happens with this delay things, which is stagger. So what I'm saying is, the difference when the animation starts for the next element, let's say I want to animate this span, this should start after 0.3 seconds, the first element has started animating. So like there's a delay of 0.3 seconds in every element that is animating. So you would see a delay of 0.3 seconds after each word is getting rendered on the screen. So that's how you can take advantage of this stagger util, which is simply provided by the frame of motion. Right. There's one more example of stagger animation. I can show it to you. Right. Let's say there's a to-do list, and I want to do something fancy. If user has completed like all the to-dos in their list, right, which is quite impossible, but okay. So as soon as I will click on the last one, right, I want something cool to happen, something that gives a good feedback to the user that they have selected, they have done all the to-dos. So if I click on this, you will notice that all the checkboxes animate in a sync, right? If I uncheck this, right, you would see that it all animates in a sync. That's again is happening with stagger animation. So I'm checking that if every element is checked, I just want to animate the input component, and here input component is the checkbox. So I'm saying rotate it to like 10 degrees and then increase the scale. I'll show the animations again. If you see, it rotates back, it scales, and it comes back to its original size. And I want this color, so this accent color, I want to change it from blue to green, right? And I want the duration for each animation to be 0.4. And I want the delay between the previous element and the next element to be 0.7. So that's where you see that there's a sync. It's not like every element is animating in one go. The previous one, the next one, there's a delay of like 0.07 seconds. that gives like a good feel to the user, right? Once they have selected all the checkboxes. There's one last animation I can show it to you, which is like a parallax effect. It's pretty common. It's nothing new. It's nothing fancy. You hover on this car and it just changes its rotation around the axis and it scales up, right? So what you can do is, frame of motion internally uses motion values, right? So what I'm doing is, if I'm moving my mouse, I have defined these motion values, right? So, and I'm apparently changing these motion values inside this handle function, right? And once I've done all the calculation, you can ignore this for now. Once I've done all the calculation, I'm setting all these motion values. And the best part is, if I set these values, the component won't render again. So there's no re-rendering if I set the values. Once I've set the values, I want to combine all these motion values into one. So I can use motion template, which is basically used for combining all the motion values into one motion value. And I can provide it in the style. And that's how it works. You can do a lot of things with use motion template when you have to combine multiple values into one, right? And similarly with the gradient, when I'm hovering, right, there's a gradient which is moving. So that's, again, I'm using it with the use motion template. I think that's all the prototypes I had, right? Next, if you want to learn more about it, I really find these two resources pretty good, which is Frontend FI and Sam's YouTube channel. These are like two OG creators when it comes to frame of motion. You can definitely check them out. And that's pretty much it. Thank you. You can scan this QR. It has all the links.